Welcome to Mohanraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans. We're here today with a fabulous editor guest, Liz Gorinsky. Liz is a longtime friend of the podcast, or at least of us, and we're delighted to have her with us today. Ben, can you tell our listeners a little bit about Liz?
Liz is one of the most illustrious editors in the field. She was editor forever at Tor and one of the biggest science fiction imprints in the world, probably, and won the 2017 Hugo for Best Editor Long Form and is justly celebrated. And also, not coincidentally, is my editor in her new from her new small press imprint, Erewhon Books, which is the best place. and she is my editor there for the upcoming The Unravelling, my novel, and a lot of other kick-ass novels as well.
And the Unravelling is coming out when?
May 20th. May.
Yes. We have to. We're not very good about promoting it. We should. In fact, I'm going to just say, Darius, we should make a note to add a little promo thing at the end of the episodes, telling people about the Unravelling. So, because we're going to be launching this podcast on March 15th, so. They should hear about it. All right.
So they're still hearing this in the future, which is it's still our future, but
yes.
it will be the past by the time.
That's true. By the time this airs.
Yes.
When I say May, I may possibly mean this month, depending on when you hear this.
Depending on when you hear this, or it could have been 3 months ago. We'll find out. So
that would be poor timing on my part.
So. What we're going to do here is we're going to just chat a little bit. I'd love to take a few steps back, if you don't mind, going to the start of your editing career a little bit. I have a lot of students, I teach at UIC, who are interested in editing, and they want to know, how do you get started in it? And maybe that's different now than it was when you got started. So you could talk a little bit about both, right?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit different. I suppose my haphazard path into it is that I think that these days I encounter more people that kind of grow up knowing that they want to edit things. And I kind of for a while, standard college, having no idea what I wanted to do, but I was sort of doing completely unrelated things, and actually kind of fell onto the path because I was involved in the science fiction community. I was running my college science fiction society from I think from my sophomore year, so I fell into that, and that was more of the community part was important, but a lot of that was logistics and administration, but also getting to know the fact that there was a science fiction world a little bit more. So that took me to my first science fiction convention. But I was also studying totally unrelated things in college, and but beginning to read a lot more comic books. That was a lot of my recreational reading in college because I had just heavy reading for all of my other course loads. So most of my fun reading was comics. And at some point, relatively late, it occurred to me that people made them, and that was the job that people could do. And I became interested in finding out how people had that job. So my first editorial internship was actually with DC Comics. So my last semester of college, I interned at DC and was really excited. Oh wait, I'm sorry. I think I've got the timeline wrong. It was the summer before my final year. Interned at DC and was pretty interested. I was okay, this is great. I love this. What do I do next?
That sounds like a dream internship, right? I'm imagining myself as a college student. That would be wild.
Yeah. It was really interesting. The weird thing about it is that I was in a DC Universe mainstream, and I was kind of an indie Vertigo reader, but there was nowhere to do that. So I think that I was in an environment with a bunch of people that were kind of had the rule book of how high the Justice League Tower is above the world memorized.
Right.
And I was. I had read superhero comics as a kid, but that was not kind of where I wanted to go with that.
I will say my superhero comic as a kid was Amethyst Princess of Gemworld, which a lot of people are not familiar with, but it was an awesome
Oh.
comic. It was really good. So I kind of skipped over. She was from another planet, but she was on our planet, and she looked like a regular girl, but secretly she was the Princess of Gemworld and in hiding because there were all of these political machinations back home, and she had these powers. She was great.
Feels very
Oh,
proto
that's
Steven
awesome.
Universe, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Was she also young? Was she like a
Yeah, like
teen or a
a
girl?
teenage, college-ish. Yeah, yeah. I actually, at some point, I found a bound volume of, the first set of the Amethyst comics a few years ago in a comic store, and I was super excited. And I brought them home to my daughter and tried to press them on her, and she was not impressed. She was like, "What is this black and white thing you're handing me?" So
I feel like I should put in a plug for the Mike Barron and Steve Rude run on Nexus in the 90s.
I don't know.
That's another obscure indie comic of the
There we
80s.
go.
Anyway,
There we go.
Yeah, no,
So
my pathway on that was, I think the first thing that I really fell for was a comic called The Power Pack. My comic book parents were Walt and Louise Simonson, and Wheezy Simonson was writing something called The Power Pack that was like basically a bunch of, it was for kids that were orphaned, and they were like elemental. So it was the same kind of thing. It was like,
and is that
first
Marvel? I
tense.
think I've seen that possibly, or is it an
I
indie
think
one?
I think it was Marvel, yeah.
Because when Noah was like, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something, I was like, comics, we should read superhero comics. And I went down to the local Basel comic store, and I don't know, I mean, I don't have a comprehensive acquaintance with current superhero comics or anything, but just browsing through the stacks, I had the sense that this thing had happened since when I was a kid, where so few comics were entry level in this, not just in the sense of, not that they weren't necessarily for kids, like they were bright and colorful and there was pow, but there was such a Talmudic density of like, you had just, even to follow the plot line, you had to be like, well, this person was transformed into this person's body, and this is an epic war. And I was just like, the density of references was like, I was like, I think this is for adults now. It's something weird about it, where it didn't feel like it was an accessible medium for an 8-year-old. When I was 8 and sick, my parents would just bring me a pack of, a stack of what my father would call funny books, like superhero comics. And they were pretty, you could kind of jump in. You kind of knew what was going on. And now there's this. And the one thing I found there where I was like, this is comprehensible to an 8-year-old was in fact Power Pack. It was like
nice.
They were hanging out with Wolverine or something, but it was very much like,
I think, now I would like, I'm trying to think what my kids got into. Things like Zeta the Space Girl, Lumberjanes, that are, presented as graphic novels, not
How America Got Her Sword.
Yeah.
But and in fact, when I asked the people in the store, and I was like, are comic books just for, they were like, kids read manga.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense. Right. All right, well,
back to your story.
I know we should do a comics episode, because now I want to talk about ElfQuest and Xenophile, and but Liz was talking about other stuff.
So I was really interested in working in the comics world, and then I think after that initial internship, I tried reaching out to Marvel, because I'd already interned at DC, and they didn't return my calls. But I was in the Science Fiction Society. Somebody was saying, "Oh, Tor has internships," and I hadn't really thought about doing prose publishing, but I wrote to them. They took me in, and I used to say that I never left. For a long time, I didn't ever leave.
For a long time, you didn't leave.
For a long time, you didn't leave.
So I have a question. Were these paid internships? And I ask because my students will want to know. Like,
no, they were not paid internships.
Did you get college credit? Was it through the university or no?
I did not get real college credit. No, like it was. I think that it's. And I feel like it started becoming the credit, I feel like, is like reliant on kind of what your college felt was valuable experience for you. Payments, just no publishing internships paid at the time. It was basically like, how do we get some free labor in here?
I think this has changed, right? Like, I think now there's been like a growth of maybe we shouldn't be abusing these college students, and we should pay them for their work. Or, at least at UIC where I teach, it's relatively easy to contact the various internship classes on campus and say, hey, we'd like to be on your list of places where students can go and do internships, get credit. And the So like in the English department, we have an internship class that is structured. So like they are meeting in class and they have assignments and they're being evaluated. And then they are also doing an internship, right? So I think that model actually works reasonably well. And Darius Finisar, who is our sound editor, went through one of those for us at the SLF,
Oh,
and then we
cool.
ended up hiring him. So, so occasionally that happens too, but as it happened for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that the pipeline is very important. And for a long time, like a lot of tours, certain new hires were coming in from the internship space, but there's certainly an advantage to being there. And so I had been there for the semester and was kind of getting prepared to leave, but it was this thing where I was like, I was living in New York anyway, so hey, I might as well stay here for a little bit longer, like while I find my first grown-up job now that I am out in the world and like suddenly needing to pay rent. And then they fired someone and I took his job. Yeah. I felt bad about it at the time, but I was clearly like a slightly better fit for that job than he was. And so, yeah, stayed at Tor for a very long time after that. And they are pretty good at basically starting somebody out in, just I guess giving them more responsibilities to suit wherever they are. So I acquired my first book about 8 months in at Tor, which I think these days they tend to like hold out for a little bit longer because they want Patrick Nielsen Hayden has the line of like, we need, more Igors and fewer mad scientists. Basically, just like they need the people to do the assistant level things.
Sure.
But in those days, you could kind of find a book and like fall in love with it and start championing it as long as you kept doing your regular job.
I mean, that sort of leads into the question of what are all the things. So I think that's the part two of this question. After you find your editing job, Marianne students, is like, so what is I was going to ask this. What is the difference between when you acquired your book, that's like acquisition editor, and then there are what are all the hats that
jobs
editors wear, and what do you get to do when you start, and what?
Like I once co-taught a class with Kelly Link, a writing workshop class that we'd put together, and I was really stunned at how differently we approached editing, right? And just in the workshop environment, right? Because it turns out I am very much a big picture developmental editor. I want to talk about structure and character and so on, and she is like paragraph level, sentence level, word level choice, fine, and her work is beautiful, and you can sort of, it's not surprising in some sense that that's what she's drawn to. But I was thinking as we did this, I was like, oh, I'm really glad I don't have her job. Like that's not how I think, and I don't have the patience I think that kind of approach requires. Does that make sense?
And then I think and I think there are those three things: buying the book, editing, big picture developmental editing, and line, like making all the words right, are the three things that I think writers think editing is. And I have a suspicion there are a lot of other things that editors do. So, Liz.
I mean, I think the really funny thing about that is that what people view is the sort of from the outside view is the essential part of editing. That is the thing that is like really not taught in terms of editing. And that I think is why people do have very different approaches to editorial. But I think that sometimes people get lucky and wind up in a case where somebody mentors them through learning to edit, maybe will co-edit a few rounds with them. I have had, other than my dad correcting my papers when I was like in high school, I've had no formal editorial education. So it's all kind of self-taught and like just responding to the text and seeing what it needs. But people do develop very different techniques because they're often just kind of thrust at that part of the job. But that is also that's kind of the thing that you do at home. Like you don't people kind of feel that like editing and reading and taste and things like that, that's the talent part of the job. Maybe it can be taught, maybe it can't. And I honestly don't know because I haven't been taught it, but that you will get a little bit more instruction on kind of the everything else, which is and some of that is what you start by doing in the kind of the assistantship does become a little bit like an apprenticeship where you'll start kind of you start doing the purely administrative stuff for the editors that you're working with. and in a big house, you might be editing. I was assisting, I think, 3 different editors, or two primarily, and then like one person that would pop up every once in a while, and doing for them it varied. That at the beginning it would probably be, oh, take this pile of text for our launch sheets and put it into this arcane system that actually produces our launch sheets, and a bunch of copying, a bunch of mailing. Some of that stuff is electronic now, but there was just so much filing of papers that that you'll never get back. But also just like spying on the office, like being around when somebody was having the phone conversation with the agent, and eavesdropping. Like, you're encouraged to eavesdrop as much as possible, and then like maybe you got to ask questions, or maybe you're brought in. It was like, oh, I'm having this like problem, can you research this and figure out what the answer to this problem is? And then attending all of the meetings, prepping for the meetings. And I think that it was all of that day-to-day stuff that did eventually translate into what you do when you are a more grown-up editor. That as in helping your editor prep for it, you'd learn those steps yourself.
When you say that the creative editorial piece is the stuff you do at home, I think that was something that shocked me when I was I was graduating college in '93, and I went to the Career Center with my English degree, and I said, okay, what am I gonna, it was like, spring semester. I was like, if I don't get into grad school, what can I do with this degree, right? And so I started looking through the binders. They had all these binders, and publishing seemed like a good option. And I started looking into it, and then it became clear. They said like publishing is one of the lowest paid professional jobs. I think I have this number in my head that like average salary at the time was like $12,000 for starting out. And I was like, how do you live in New York on $12,000? I don't understand. And then from talking to people, they also said, oh, and all the manuscript reading stuff, you do that on the train going home. You do that on Saturday and Sunday, and like all the actual editorial work in that sense, the editing piece.
Yeah, what writers think editing is what editors do after 9 to 5.
That's right. And the 9 to 5 in the office is all the necessary paperwork,
really
right? You have to like meet with publicists, and you have to have bookkeeping things, and
But and my question about that, because it is sort of mysterious, this what happens during the 9 to 5, is that and I also, we're going to get to, I'm curious about how that differs in a big house where there's all these different departments to coordinate it, and there are different silos, and in what you're doing now in a small press where like you're juggling all of the balls yourself. But like, I wonder, how does that break down in a pie chart between like what it takes to produce actual physical copies of a book that have fonts and spacing, what it takes to like do the marketing and communications that anyone will have heard of this book in terms of the channel and in terms of the general public? Or is that somebody else's job? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is when you were an editor, the entire 9 to 5, does that include that sort of stuff? Or is that actually a whole other department of other people who are doing that from 9 to 5 or picking the book cover and so on? Like, is how much? So
that's a big question. So maybe differences between what you did at Tor at a big house versus how you're doing it now.
Yeah, I think what does that 95 break down in both contexts? That I think is my question.
Yes. I think there we go.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Okay. So I would say probably the biggest difference is that in a big house, there's other people that are doing all those other jobs. And so you are acting kind of more in, let's say, the project manager capacity. You are involved in almost every aspect of things, but it is a lot of like, let's get this deliverable from my desk to somebody else's who's going to deal with it. And so it would almost be kind of like editorial would be dealing with things that are kind of about the primary messaging of the book, and everything that had to do with kind of the final preparation of the manuscript of the book, and then would hand it over to, let's say, the production department to turn it into a real book. And so that would still be a big part of the, let's say, the overall pie chart. But in that case, you kind of like have the, it depends on whether the pie chart that you're looking at is just the editor's job or the editor plus the 60 other people that work in that company in various capacities. And it would be kind of, you really would have, we'd be like, it's the difference between 40 different people touching your book for a little while, or it being a 3%, 5% part of their job versus in our case, 4 people who there are times when like your book is going to be 100% of our job, or something like that. And the big difference in Erewhon is that like we still don't have, no like real departments. We have one person in marketing and publicity and 2 editors, and then an assistant who like helps all of us, and then some freelancers. And when we started out for the first year, we were 2 people. So at that point, we were HR, we were legal, we were the art department, we were production.
Right. Yeah, what's that been like? That sounds both terrifying and exciting to go from one of a very large number of people to.
I also suspect it's not 9 to 5 anymore.
No,
well, if it ever was.
And I mean, of course, intensified by pandemic stuff. But I think it's not quite the majority, but like half of my time at this company has been doing it in this weird way where those divisions are tough to begin with. But the terrifying and exhilarating part of it was, I think, and I mean, I suppose that for basically, if you're working in only editorial, you kind of do the same thing for every book over and over again. And that's, so you start to get better at it, but it also can be kind of, awareness of like every single book I'm going to have to take through the same series of 4 meetings and like preparations and like do the same things with it. So then the difference in kind of like starting, I think, any new endeavor, and I don't know, there probably are some books that are kind of like, here's how you start a publishing company, but I will cop to not having read any of those books. And it was more kind of my awareness of, okay, from the editorial seat, I know that the job has these components and I need to make all of those components within this new company. And I need a new legal boilerplate. And so you might reach out to somebody else for resources, but then, still need to go back and say, go back and like figure out how to kind of form that into a real contracts department and get that rolling. And and so it's kind of like, and I think that what I began to realize is that like how much there was I guess I had sort of fractal knowledge of what was going on in publishing, that I would see a little bit of what another department would do, but by being the person in the company that was helming it, I kind of got to learn all of the infinite complexities. And,
that's like, it's not just a lot. It's
so
in some ways
just like developing that expertise and like, getting all the levels of the task.
So I have 1,000 small press questions. I'm going to try and distill them to a couple. For context, I've published with big presses and small presses for my fiction, but last year a couple of years ago, I wrote a cookbook, and then I spent a year pitching it to big presses and small presses, and found that for cookbooks, mostly, even if they like the book, they want you to have a platform. They want you to have a restaurant or 1 million followers on YouTube or something like that. And it's very hard to sell a cookbook otherwise. So eventually I decided to do a Kickstarter and self-publish it. And that's been a really learning experience, because I realized there are many pieces of this I didn't know how to do well, right? I could make a graphic on canvas for the cover, Canva, but it didn't look good, right? And so, okay, now I'm budgeting to hire a cover designer. I realized I want the interior to look good and professional as well. Okay, luckily that cover designer is able to do interior design. And in fact, the first time I tried to hire a cover designer, I found somebody cheap on the internet, and then I hated his work as it turned out. So then I ended up paying him a kill fee and starting over. So that was an expensive lesson, and paid someone more expensive and beautiful and competent the next time around. And so I feel like there were kind of all these stages in terms of, there were pieces I knew how to do. Like I knew how to, after 25 years in the field, I could handle the editorial work, but not the art design, not the layout to like make it look right, and make it look designed. And then publicity, I feel is something that lots of us fail on really badly. And I feel like I've struggled with publicity for a long time, and I've hired publicists, and I don't know, I've tried all kinds of things. And so that's something that I still find really tricky, and trying to decide, like, should we be spending money on Facebook ads and, et cetera. And so, there's sort of there's something that used to go around saying, like, when you get an advance from a publisher, you should just take the whole advance and spend it on publicity and you'll get that money back. And I don't know if that's still told to writers as common wisdom, or if it's just, just like, like ridiculous folk wisdom that should not be followed. So, but I do sort of feel like everything I've done has been under publicized for the last 25 years. And so I'm trying to address that better going forward. So yeah, those are my, I don't know if it's questions exactly, but I feel like those are like the stumbling blocks I ran into, even with that, little indie publishing of one book. Right. And I wonder if those are, I don't know, whatever thoughts you have in response to that, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to watch a lot of your journey with that book on Facebook, and I think it was similar to kind of a lot of the things that we've been doing. And I suppose the main difference would be that we were kind of always mindful of that not only are we learning how to do this thing for the one book, but we're also building sort of procedures and structures to make a house that is sustainable going forward. And so, there's some things that I learned that I still do to this day. And there's, I built a ton of procedural documents, whether it's either how to remind myself when I need to go back and do this thing 6 months later, how to do it, or now I've written this up so that I can hand it off to somebody else. And then there's some things that I felt that I could never fully learn. I know what happens in marketing and publicity, but it's also not a thing that I thought that I would be good at, and not a thing that I wanted to learn how to do, because I hate asking people for things. And so I kind of always knew that I could handle doing, or at least I presumptuously thought that I could handle art direction, and we're still doing our own art direction because that's fun and a thing that I like. Whereas our first hire outside of, we've simultaneously hired a new editor and a marketing and publicity person. But I always knew from the beginning that I would need somebody else to do marketing and publicity, because I didn't want to, didn't think I'd be good at it.
Yeah, I feel a lot of the time. I feel a lot of the time like I'm reinventing the wheel. I don't know if there's like a book out there that's like, the indie publisher's guide or the small press guide to publicity. If not, someone should write it and make $1 million, right? So,
that's what you just said about I knew I was going to have to hire a marketing publicity person. That's sort of my parents had small businesses, and that was always their philosophy, was that there isn't any specific job that is like the job of the person who's running the show. It's more like whatever you're not good at, you could hire someone to do. So it's like there isn't any like you sort of build a group of people who are complementing whatever you're lacking, and that's I don't know, you know what I mean? So it's like if you found the marketing fun, then you wouldn't hire a marketing person. If you find the cover design fun, then you'd still do that, but you hire the person who's the opposite of you. So instead of trying to hire people who are just like you, you're sort of trying to hire people who mesh with you but have complementary skill sets.
I would also add in, you have to think about what your time is worth, right? And if you, if typically you bill at $50 or $100 an hour for your editorial work, and you can find someone to copy your tweets into TweetDeck and send them out, and they're right out of college and you're paying them $25 an hour, you should probably do that. You shouldn't be the one sitting there cutting and pasting those tweets from Facebook to Twitter, right? So there's just kind of like think
Yeah,
a
although I
little.
think there's a nonlinear thing when it's, I mean, there's a different, if because I've worked both in like contracting world where it's definitely like, this is my hourly rate and I will fill all my hours. And in startup world, which is like, we have this much money, you know what I mean? And it's like, you can be the most badass program in the world. We're not getting any more money until we ship this. So you are sweeping the floor. You know what I mean? Like, so there's a cash flow crunch moment. And there's
I agree. But I guess the reason I'm going to say this, I think especially women, I see not handing off things they should be handing off and not valuing their time well, right? And there's a way in which we're so used to devaluing our time that we don't pause and do these kind of business calculations, right? And maybe you don't have the money. Maybe it's like in 6 months we'll have enough money that we can hire someone to do this. Great. At least you know that's part of the business plan, right? That it will make sense to pass that off when you can. So I don't know, Liz, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I am very, very guilty of that. And I mean, I think that the other two factors are, first, that in startup world, somebody's got to do it. So, there's many cases we started hosting events and I would be the person that was cleaning up at the end of the events because I would be the person that would stay up latest and I probably could have hired somebody to come in. But then the other kind of thing is like, I've got a strong control freak aspect of things. And so I needed to be confident that not only that assuredly somebody could do it, but can somebody do it faster than I can teach them to do it?
Well, and they can't right away, right? I mean, this is the problem. Ben and I have kids, and this is always the problem with children, is that it's slower to teach them and have them do it for a while, right? And so you have to kind of like budget the extra time to teach them how to do the thing, and then they'll.
But that's a different case because your kids, like my primary goal is that my kid acquire the skill, right? Like that's a very different case than I want this done.
My goal is the house stay clean often, right? So like I think that's pretty parallel to the publishing the books get out the door, right? And so for the house staying clean, there's a day when I'm like, 8-year-old, you were old enough to learn how to run the vacuum cleaner. And I set aside the time to teach them how to do that, even though I could do it much faster, right? And I'm not thinking ahead to like when they're an adult and they need to clean their own room. I'm thinking ahead to like, oh, thankfully I can finally offload this task because they're old enough to pick up this piece of the household responsibilities, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Ben?
I just think there's both. I mean, there's an error in both directions. Sure. I agree with you actually that it's gendered, that in a way that like the impulse to be like, oh, I shouldn't ask anybody is probably something you're going to experience more than me. But I think that there's like two failure modes, right? One in which you do things that it makes no sense for you to do because you a little investment in delegating and training someone would like produce a win. And the other thing is where you're sort of, I mean, there is also over delegating where it's like, this is taking more time to constantly manage this person than, you know what I mean? Like where you have a big department and lots of communication and like less is getting done than if you just did it, And so. Anyway.
And this is why I'm not like making Liz take my interns now. Although when everyone is ready, drop me a note because I'm pretty sure I'm going to have students who'd be very excited to intern with you. So when you get to that phase.
Absolutely. I think there's also the failure mode of being generally quite competent at most things. And that's always like a thing where, I mean, there's certainly things in life that I'm terrible at, but pretty much everything in the publishing sphere is something that I'm like, I can do this reasonably well. And then there's things that I find more, they engage my magpie brain a little bit more. And so like Ben Molotow's, I did the interior design for his book. I was using the kind of like the program that we're using, but I was like super excited by that. It was like a fun, weird challenge. And I think it looks pretty good. We still have like iterations to go with that, but like, that was a thing that I almost certainly should have like hired somebody out, but also I wanted to find the fonts and make it look good. And like, it felt, I don't know.
But that's also very personal. I support your doing that work. And in fact, I'm not even saying to offload all the grunt work, because sometimes what happens is, so I tried that at one point. I was like, I'm going to hire someone to do all of the housework and yard work. And that freed up a lot of time, but it then meant that all of my work time was intellectual time, and it was exhausting. It was like mentally exhausting, and I wasn't getting the physical breaks of like going and doing the dishes and so on. And so like it took me maybe a year to recalibrate to like, okay, this piece of it, I can send out this chunk of the work. I should keep some of it, right? Like,
And
it's good for me. You know?
This is what I see as the more male gendered error, where and this is like there's the error of being like, well, I shouldn't ask somebody to do everything, so I will do everything myself, whether it makes sense or not. And then there's the error of being like judging your tasks based on status. Like when you say like, well, you should figure out what your hourly rate is. It's like, yeah, but I know so many, particularly men, who are like, well, clearly it makes no sense for me to do dishes.
Right.
It's like, that's not, you know what I mean? Like that is not the right way to think about that. Like it you know, just because in some context you can command $50 an hour, $100 an hour, $200 an hour, does not mean that like you should view your entire life through the lens of like dishes. That's not a $200 an hour. You know what I mean? Like that's a good way to destroy your, you know, your marriage, probably, right? Like, so,
right.
So I actually, and I sort of have a very, you know, conscious resistance to that of like, I should be doing all kinds of things that are, some of which are, you know, some of which I'm good at, some of which I'm not necessarily good at, some of which are like high status, others of which are not that. And that, you know, that's what makes a full life, right? Is a broad complement of human faculties, not just like the ones that we valorize. Like you can get narrowly shunted into doing only the capital I important things, and that is a way to have
agree. I do agree. I think it's an ongoing reassessment. And if you follow me on Facebook, you will see me talking about this constantly, because I feel like every month I am reassessing and tilting things a little more in one direction or another, right? I'm very prone to trying to optimize to be able to do the maximal things with the maximal happiness. And that's an interesting challenge, right? So to take it back to Liz and Erewhon, I feel like we've gotten into like some of the nitty gritty of running a small business. I still want someone to do the publicity for me. But I wonder if you could talk a little about maybe what led you to step into this, like, I'm now going to start a small press, right? I mean, that's a big decision. And I'd love, after that, I'd love to hear about like what were you looking for when you started looking for books, right? So maybe those go together. So
sure.
Yeah.
So let's see. The defining reason why I wound up starting this small press is because somebody gave me the opportunity, and it was luck, it was privilege, but I was kind of I've been a Tor for a long time, and I decided to leave Tor at the time I was figuring that I would start some kind of an editorial freelance job. Basically, like, I was kind of leaving with the notion that I'm going to take a little while off to like catch up on all the things that I've like not been doing in like my life for a little while, and then I will start doing freelance editing. And right around the time that I was like setting up to leave Tor, I got a call from somebody who was like found me via staffing solutions, or like, you know, effectively like somebody that identified like key staffing positions, and
like you were headhunted.
Sort of like, yeah, I mean, I guess it was headhunting. There was another word for it that they used that was really, it was just kind of like, yeah, basically like identifying the staff component. And they like, it was a weird thing to me, because I was also kind of like, if I was looking for an editor, like one of the first places that I would look would be, let's say, like, you know, the Hugo roster. So I don't think I needed like a detective to find me. What they did, they found this person, found me, and then they contacted me, and they said, we have this weird opportunity that's going to like sound really strange, but like, let's have a meeting and talk it out. And so, yeah, I was, and at that meeting, they were basically like, we want to start a science fiction and fantasy, or I think, you know, fantasy publisher. I forget exactly what words they used at the time. And we're looking for a person to like start this fully funded company. And of course, for a while, that sounded too good to be true. And so I kind of like wrestled with, really? And then I had a lot of like imposter syndrome. Well, I don't know how to do this. Like, why should I do this? Like, some of like, am I taking this opportunity away from somebody else, and like who should have it? But eventually it got to the point where it's like, okay, this is being offered to me. They seem to like me. They seem to want me to do it. And I feel like, honestly, like, I feel like, even if I don't know what I'm doing, this is the thing where, like, you know, basically, I listened to a decent number of sort of like business and financial podcasts where people talk about the value of failure, and and I think especially like sort of permitting yourself to like learn if you can do a thing or to fail upwards or things like that. And I was ultimately kind of like, well, I don't know actually if I'm going to be good at this at all, but it seems too good an opportunity to pass up, and I have to try doing the thing. And so at that point, basically, I agreed to, okay, yes, I will try to start this company. And that was the point at which I like sat down and was sort of like, what are all the things that I need to do to get it rolling, and putting that in place. So I suppose the other side of like we say that like with editors, there's like a million different ways to do the job. I think with publishers, there's also many different approaches that you can take to it. And a lot of people that start out as publishers of companies sort of, I think that probably slightly more people seem to come from the marketing, from the business or marketing side of things, where their focus is that we're going to start a business. And I, coming from editorial, was definitely more on the side of I'm going to make great books, and so the books are the key part of this. One of the first things that we did out the gate was definitely some amount of business starting things at the outset, which were like, what are we going to call this thing? What is our logo going to look like? I guess we should register the domain name so that like all of that is set up. And then shortly after that, we kind of put out the word to, I think, agents first. For a while, it was like stealth, like, we're going to announce this endeavor in a few months, but you can start sending us our manuscripts now. And then just started reading. And I think one of the things that I was relatively clear on was kind of the niche that I wanted to fall in. And from one lens, it was like, how do I kind of, describe the kind of thing that I've been doing in speculative fiction all along? But it was also like, how do I hone the thing that I've been doing in speculative fiction all along? At House Like Tor, when I'm one editor amongst a dozen or 20, you just kind of look for books, and you don't have to say, it's not your job to figure out the mission statement of the company. At Erewhon, it became, okay, this mission statement is like, my niche of books that I'm publishing. And as I thought about what that was, it was sort of the space between, I guess I'd always been interested in the space of like really good science fiction and fantasy books that also had really high quote unquote literary quality. Or you could describe that as like being in the space between literary fiction and science fiction and fantasy. And at the start of my career, there was like, that space kind of didn't really, not that it didn't exist, but it was that, you could see it in places like Strange Horizons were definitely trying to do something of that sort, like the interstitial arts foundations. There were like people that were kind of striking out and trying to sort of define that space. But a lot of it was probably like people from the science fiction. Exactly. Yeah. Small beer was like a huge model for what I was trying to do or wanted to do or thought of as like, goals and aspirations that were kind of, I guess, looking for that space. And then there was also the folks from the literary mainstream who, at the beginning of my career, would completely ignore science fiction and fantasy. And then by the end of it, we're like, we're just going to publish a fair amount of science fiction and fantasy, but we're going to publish it with kind of like no acknowledgement of the of that ghetto over there that's doing science fiction and fantasy. So I think that my goal was to like completely exist in the space between those spaces.
I have a question about the big press, small press thing. So when I went to Clarion, one of my teachers was Nicola Griffith. And one thing she did was, I'm not quite sure she was supposed to show us these, but she brought some P&L statements, profit and loss statements from, I think it was Tor, to our workshop. I think she stripped off the identifying info and just walked us through what that looked like, right? What did these various numbers mean? This is the chunk that got spent on advertising this book, et cetera, which was a huge education. And I'd love to, if you ever want to do like a little like workshop-y class about that, we'd love to have that at the SLF, just because I think it would teach people so much. In fact, now I'm thinking like I know you're busy. I'm like, it would be great to have you do a series of classes on editing. Okay. Sorry.
Very Marianne.
Sorry.
I'm sure everyone's noticed this by now, but you can't get through an interview without like creating a new job category for somebody. And yes, anyway.
Yeah, this is clearly not an interview if we don't come out of it with a full college curriculum.
I know. Well, okay. Anyway, stifling that impulse, although Darius, if you could make a note for the FLF that we'll come back or circle back around to Liz and see if she's interested in this at some point. But my question was, one of the things that Nicholas said was that at a big press, they might be bringing out, say, 10 books a month. And of those 10 books, they've tended to fall into specific categories. And I think what she said was, one of them, maybe two, would be the sort of reasonably guaranteed bestsellers. These are the big name things that have sold well in the past. They're expected to sell well again, and those will kind of carry the month financially. And then there'll be 3 solid mid-list writers that they expect will make a small profit if all goes well. And then there'll be 5 or 6 new authors that they're taking a chance on and hoping, because art is so hard to predict and hard to market and so on, hoping that they're going to catch fire and word of mouth will lead to success. But she said a lot of those end up losing money and essentially kind of disappearing, right? That those authors then don't get picked up again and so on. And they typically, the bulk of the advertising money for the house goes to the top tier people and then the mid people and very little to the newbies. So I guess I'm wondering, is that accurate in your experience of how big houses work? I mean, I went to Clarion in 1997, so this was a long time ago. Maybe things have changed dramatically since then. And 2, is any of that relevant to what you do, or not so much as a small press?
Yeah, I mean, it's true that happens. I probably, during my time at Tor, there were like 5 to 10 different separate categorization schemes of effectively, more of like, just basically like how we decide sort of like which books are important, what do we call them, how do we assign those priorities? Like, you go through kind of like leads and super leads. For a while, everything had like an ABC value that, of course, you'd never disclose outside of the company. And sometimes it would be like, these are the leads within the genre. Effectively, the process of launching a book in a big house is sort of how you decide what gets your allocation, either your allocation of attention or your allocation of budget for marketing and publicity, co-op, things like that. It was one of the things that I probably hated most, that you'd start having meetings about a book 16 months before it was due to publish, and maybe from that very first meeting, the book's fate would be decided to some extent. And you could do some things to shift it, like get that really amazing blurb, or like some weird thing would happen where like something would get rocketed up. But like often it sort of felt like the book's fate was predetermined. Sometimes the book's fate was predetermined by how much money you spend on it. And that becomes this weird self-fulfilling prophecy where you fill out the P&L that says, okay, you get to spend either $5,000 or $500,000 on this book. And then of course you need to make back that money. So if you spent a lot of money on the book, then you need to spend a lot of money marketing it. So I just found that really frustrating, especially because I wanted to do a lot of things that might look like small books from the outside, that I was doing things that were kind of weirder, or that didn't fit into this predetermined success mold. There was a period where you could like say, I am going to buy the next thing that is like the most obvious clone of this subgenre that seems to be really hot right now, and that's the thing that's going to guarantee success at this company. And I was never doing things like that, so sometimes it was really tricky to kind of get that attention for books that, like, from a you can't decide absolute literary merit of a book, but I often felt that like my books were some of the best books, and sometimes they would be in terms of like the results in terms of starred reviews or award nominations or just acclaim or buzz or things like that. That didn't mean that they would be the books that would get the most attention. And I'm relieved to say that right now we
sell the most copies, right? Right, or that would sell the most copies either, right? Like it doesn't always translate.
Oh, right. I mean, and yeah, I think it often, not that it rarely translates, but that especially in the space of, to be quite frank, that like the at Tor for a while, the things that were kind of like the high literary side of things, that was tough for a while. It was felt that you can't market a literary book, which often for people felt like it would be a difficult book. And like you look at my book list and you'll see something like Jeff Vandermeer before he broke out. That was a literary difficult book. And Brian Slattery, these are both genius writers, but often that's kind of like, it's more of like a difficult problem to solve from within the SFNF world.
They get labeled as not a beach read.
Yeah, or not a, it's like books aren't widgets, right? And it's much easier to market widgets, right? So the ones that are more like, here is a, I mean, I'm someone who will be tempted to buy a book if it has a dragon on the cover, right? So I understand that marketing impulse of like, okay, we have all these readers who love Dan McCaffrey. We need to keep feeding them books that are like that, right? They can't get her new books anymore, but we can do things that are similar. And I do actually think there's something valid there. I recently discovered Iona Sharma's work, and as I was reading it, I was thinking, oh my God, I love these short stories. I just finished their novel last night, and it's like, like a parliamentary procedural with a gay romance. I mean, it's terrific, really fun. And I was reading it and thinking like, oh, I'm really slow writing my novels, but there's enough like overlap of South Asian queer found family stuff between my work and her work that people who are looking for more of my work, they should go read Iona Sharma. And I mean, very different writer in some ways, but will scratch some of the same itches, right? So it seems like if you're at if you're a big house and you're trying to have some reliable profits month after month, right? I can see why you would want to do that, to like try and give the readers what they want. And maybe that's sometimes in conflict with, we're just going to produce these beautiful literary books and each one is different and unique, right? That's
sure. Right? Absolutely. Yeah. And, I imagine as as Erewhon gets more formalist, we'll have to go a little bit in that direction. I hope not too far. Yeah. Right. And so the big difference with us is that a kind of like, pretty much every one of our books is going to be that experience of like, this is a weird thing that is like a little bit hard to describe, and like, please just trust us that it's good and it's doing these cool things, and it's doing 16 different cool things.
Well, and I wonder whether you could offer a subscription to Erewhon, essentially, where I don't have to decide on each individual book. I can just be like, I want a different, unusual book delivered to my door every month. And
Erewhon of the Month Club.
And I trust Liz's judgment on that, I suggest it.
Yeah, we've thought about that. Like, we've thought about it. It's a thing that we might do at some point, and it's somewhere on my like lower to-do list of like, hey, figure this out eventually, maybe. But yeah, and like right now, I think we're also saved by we're trying to keep the list to like about a dozen books a year, which means that we don't have to have the top book of the month. We kind of have a book a month, and plus some trade paperback reprints. But like that, for a while, you're going to be the top focus of like everything that we're doing, and all the other books are in the mix. We don't stop talking about a book just because it's hit its publication date, but and every once in a while something comes across and we will highlight it as like, this is going to be our lead title. But by and large, it's everything is kind of like, we want to give every book its best chance.
And that's, as an author, I think that's that we were having a conversation about this a bit ago, where about doing the Unravelling with a small press versus a big press, and it's like, that is the great advantage, is that it feels like you have, there's trade-offs, right? And so it's, maybe, if you have a book that is going to do best under the circumstances, that the publisher can buy like I don't know, Barnes and Noble and displays or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, well, this is clearly a book where lots of, we should try to get this in Walmart. Then like you're probably not as well served with a small press, I assume. But if what your book needs is like a lot of individualized, like you want attention, you don't want to like have your editor fighting with another department about what the cover's allowed to look like or whatever, then there's a great advantage of it being, of having that amount of attention.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and I suppose I should clarify, like, not to be vainglorious, but we're also trying to be in the position of like being a small press that can do anything that the big presses can. And maybe not anything, but like in some sense, you've got to be prepared to rise to that occasion. And so I feel like a good example is, probably, our big, let's say, like hopefully everything will be a success story, but we published The Midnight Bargain, which is a lovely book, but like wound up in some cases just kind of having to sort of suddenly like be in big publisher capacity there. So that book wound up on the Canada Reads front list, which is not super well known here, but basically in Canada they have this like weird but stunning competition where they get like 5 celebrity champions to champion a book, and like they talk about that book on CBC for a week, and it becomes a thing where like you're guaranteed to both sell a lot of copies, but also that it suddenly becomes part of the cultural mainstream. And they sort of surprisingly picked our book both as like literally the 3rd book that we ever released, and but also it was really their first time picking a fantasy book ever for Canada Reads. By and large, they do literary or memoir, things like that. So we had to figure out how to, we pulled the trigger on a pretty big reprint of that book, trade paperback Canada Reads specialty edition within the space of a week. The week that we published the book within 6 weeks, and the week it came out, it was like a #1 bestseller on several lists in Canada. And I mean, this is Canada. It would be harder to mobilize that within the US, but like, I think we have to be prepared to catch that fire, that lightning in a bottle if it happens.
Right. And being able to throw the money at it to do that, I think is so many people who start small presses, I think, self-fund, right? And they have a dream and like, I want to publish queer fiction, or it's often some marginalized group that they feel isn't getting a fair shake in the big presses, and so they have very tiny budgets to start out. And I think, and this is true of indie publishing as well. And the problem there is it can be a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Of like, if you can't give it that boost to lift it up into visibility, then even if you've got a great book, it may just disappear. It may never get seen. And I feel like that's becoming more and more of a problem, right? I mean, like, I love that indie publishing has gotten easier, but it also means a flood of material, right? So that's, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but I think it's a very live challenge.
I suspect in some ways it's more of a problem. In other ways, there's also more resources to deal with it. Like the situation you're describing, which you have a relatively small a small press where it's your 3rd book. You don't necessarily, I mean, of course, you have deep relationships all over the field, but like it's your 3rd book. You don't necessarily have everything built out yet.
Right.
And all of a sudden you have to produce some massive number. It just feels like that would have been harder in 1980. You know what I mean? Like it feels like that. I mean, or even 10 years ago, like Maybe. It feels like there's a fluidity or an ability to like, roll things up quickly.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking more about, I mean, I'll give you just the plain example, right? When I did the cookbook, I set a budget of $10,000 to do it. And I was going to do it print on demand, do it well, but print on demand if I got 10,000. And I ran a Kickstarter and I got 15,000 within a couple days. It bust through and did well. So then I had this moment of like, well, I can either stay with the print on demand, take 5,000 in profits and call it a day, like get these 200 people their books, or whatever, a couple of 300 or 400 people their books and be done. Or I can invest $20,000 in a print run, right? And like the overall budget now goes to something like $35,000 or something like that, right? With all the, or 30,000 with all the original costs plus the print run costs. And there is a potential for a lot more profit there, but I had to stop and have a conversation with my husband about our finances and like, can we afford to gamble $20,000 on my being able to sell 2,000 copies of this book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had some indicator that there would be a demand, so we went for it, and then of course we launched a year ago yesterday, March 6th, the year of the pandemic was when we launched. And we had our launch party at FogCon, and coming back on the plane, I was like, I probably shouldn't have gone to FogCon because that's when we were hearing about everything and learning about everything. And then we canceled. Ben and I had a road trip planned,
Yep.
that we were going to be promoting the book, and we canceled everything. We canceled so many public appearances. And so now I have like maybe 1,500 books left in the warehouse. And it's going to be a slow roll selling them, I think, right? And so I feel like that's the kind of thing, like, a lot of people will not be able to, put in the additional $20,000 or whatever when there's an indicator that might be the right thing to do. And B, if something bad happens and there's an interruption or whatever, at the end of the year, I had to decide whether I wanted to pay, I don't remember, $700 or something to warehouse the books for another year, right? And so that's, again, like, can you invest in that longer term? And, if it's your baby, sure, like, if you can afford it, you probably are going to do that. But if it's a small press and you've got 5 books or 10 books and they're not just your one single thing that you're pouring your heart into, I think it just gets harder. I guess that's all I'm saying. Like, and you have to make these difficult decisions. And, with Serendip Press was, my idea originally was that I would publish other Sri Lankan authors at least, and maybe do an anthology and so on. And there's just a lot of logistics and a certain, like, I don't want to just do a book and put it out and then have it disappear, right? Like, publishing for the sake of publishing. So if I'm going to do a book for somebody else, I want to do it to the level that I would want my books done to. And that's a big commitment, right? So hence I've not pulled the trigger on that yet, but it's sort of lurking in the future, right? So I don't know. So sorry, we've gone off into the indie press thing. Do you want to talk a little about the books that you've chosen so far that are out? I think you have 6 books out. Is that right? 3 from 2020?
I think it's 5 books officially on the market. Yeah,
5 on the market?
So it was 3 books in the first year. And we plan to start the first year with kind of like a more full roster. I think it was going to be about 9 books, but like partially just the figuring out how to get everything rolling, and a lot of it like be the pandemic and that change of plans wound up being that we only actually had 3 books last year. And the first 3 were The Fortress by S.A. Jones, which is a book about basically like a woman-led society and like sort of restorative justice in the context of this kind of like or like women-led society and a male who kind of does wrong in a like it's sort of a vaguely Me Too context, and decides to save his marriage, to submit himself to this society for a while. And then we had The Scapegracers by Hannah Abigail Clark, which
I'm enjoying the hell out of.
Oh, yay. I'm so glad you're reading
that. That is a great book.
I
want to talk about Scapegracers.
It's a teen lesbian like one can say sort of like The Craft, but everybody is actually friends. It's like a teenage lesbian witch who finds her coven, and so it is in a lot of like sort of tropey like high school tropes plus like witch click tropes, but super queer, and also like I think like I guess very validating in the people being able to support each other rather than tear each other down.
It's a wonderful rereading and interrogation of high school tropes, really. I think there's this, I mean, it's very much inhabiting a world of like The Craft or Heathers or Mean Girls or something is like the setting, and then it's like such a much more honest and real relationship to that sort of that world that adults tell these stories about that are very zero sum too. And yeah, I mean, just the very fact that like you're sort of reading the beginning of it, like, are these, like you're set up to assume that these popular girl, it's like there's a misfit meeting these popular girls, and like every movie has told us this is not going to go well, and then like there's just so much love that it's and it's and in such a the opposite of sentimental. There's a tremendous amount of like connection, and it's also like a ruthlessness about like the realism of like their flaws and their I don't know, and there's this the protagonist, the voice of the protagonist is great, and she's this reckless, kind of self-destructive, like, she's a mess in a way, and she's so
disaster lesbian trope.
I believe that's the term du jour, right? That's a popular term right now, right? Exactly. I'm just coming off of also having fallen in love with Shira, so yes, she's very Catra or
nice
disaster lesbian, but she's so compelling, and you're so much with her. And I think a lot of that is down to the line level writing, which is beautiful. Like it's just a vividly, powerfully written book. Anyway.
So good. And that's sort of this case where you're kind of like, you have this like unknown 20, I think they were 21 at the time, year old writer that winds up in your inbox, and like, just get floored by that. And the third book that year was The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk, and that's basically a book about let's say a pseudo-Victorian society, and where women can do magic to begin with, but then are expected to sort of like subvert that all to risk, basically to marriage and like motherhood and things of that sort. And that was edited by our second editor, Sarah Guan. She also did The Rise of the Red Hand, which came out.
So I actually think we're gonna pause because we've had you for an hour now. So before we go into the 2021 books, we're gonna take a short break, and then we'll come back, and we want to hear about those. And I also want to ask a little bit about the editor-author relationship, since we have Ben here to talk about what it's been like being edited by Erewhon. So, or you can also talk about, how Ben is as an author to work with. So we will be back very shortly. We're here with Liz Gorinsky of Erewhon Books. I'm Marianne Moenrauch with Ben Rosenbaum, and we are talking about Liz's new small press, and we just heard about the 2020 books, and we were going to ask her to tell us about the 2021 books, one of which will be Ben's. But there's a few that are out already, right? So So I was realizing as I was talking about this that we do have like a few that will come out before this podcast officially airs. So in February we put out The Rise of that Red Hand by Olivia Chada, which is a sort of like cyberpunky sort of teens in the revolution YA crossover book. And also Eli Yu's On Fragile Waves, which is a magical realist story of a family fleeing Afghanistan, and they're basically like travel through migrant camps and eventually settling in Australia. Like really beautiful. Nice. And I feel like I've already been seeing some press about that. Like it's been showing up on my Facebook feed. She's getting some good reviews for it already, which is terrific. So.
Yeah, I hope so.
I love her writing.
We're proud to have 4-star reviews for that book.
Nice, really nice.
And then I think the next few books, I'm not going to go all the way through the year, but then we'll have Folklore by. Wow, this is amazing. By Angela Herr, something like, all the nouns flood my head. And that is also sort of on the Korean scientist based in Sweden. I don't have the pitch for this one down yet. Again, it's Sarah's book. And it's sort of a meditation on family ghosts and how they kind of like, I guess like ghosts and traditions haunt everyday existence interspersed with scientific mindset. And then Ben's The Unravelling, which you might have the elevator pitch down better than I do.
I'm just thinking, listening
to
these,
your elevator pitch.
It's becoming clear, right? Just listening to this, that this is not, Goodfellas meets Star Wars, or you know what I mean? Like these books that you're publishing are not easily encapsulated in commercial pitches, right? So, which is great.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my elevator pitch for The Unravelling, although you should do yours too, is that it is a far future comedy of manners in a time of social unrest, where in a world which is very different.
But you don't even mention gender in that. So I was
trying to work that in, which I've spun the dials on the way that the body works and gender works. And what's your pitch, Marianne?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't read the final version. I read an early draft of The Unravelling, and I gather you've changed it a lot, so I don't want to give people the wrong impression. But That said, when I read it, I mean, Ben and I are longtime fans of the Tiptree Award, which is given for
now the Otherwise Award.
Now the Otherwise Award, given for explorations of gender and in science fiction and fantasy, I think in both. And I'm a former juror, and I think Ben and I have talked about how we rather would love to win an Otherwise Award at some point in our careers. And I feel like you took a good stab at it with this book, because it really rethinks how we approach the idea of what gender is. And it's not simply being gender fluid or switching, pronouns. It's a complete rethinking. And I found that fascinating. At the same time, it was an enjoyable story, and I loved the characters, and, there was a plot and tension and so on. But the most memorable part to me was what you did with gender, right? Which I'm still thinking about. And I still, as I create aliens, I'm sort of constantly thinking, like, do our gender categories make any sense for these aliens, right? So, so I don't know, Liz, you want to talk, like, what drew you to this book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we've been friends for a long time, and I've been coming to Ben's readings and probably hearing snippets of this book for like 8
years. Yeah, many years. In various
and so I think I also remember being struck by, I forget, one of the WisCon readings at Michelangelo's, and just like hearing some excerpt that you read that was like particularly inventive about, particularly inventive in the way that it was like describing the character's gender, and just being really enchanted by that. And I have no idea if that section like is still in the book, or like, I
think it changed a lot. I think I read sort of the scene in the lab, and I think but it was a earlier version. It was like 3 pronoun revisions ago, and also the bodies were a little different. And I after that, I think I read that, and then that same con, I got a extremely memorable critique from Megan McCarran, in which she ripped me a new one and immeasurably contributed. So it's a very different, particularly that scene, and also the whole book.
I think I was there for that one. So that critique session, I remember that. This is a thing that it's difficult with novels to get critiques. And one thing that we were doing for a while is a group of us would sort of say, we're all going to WisCon, let's sign up to do book length work critiques. And we'd set aside, 2 hours each to do these crit sessions around these novels. And, it's all crowding into a hotel room with snacks, and it's exhilarating and draining and really interesting.
It's a big investment, and you can't have too many people. You can't do Clarion style, like 17 people with novels, but you can get like 4 or 5 people.
4 or 5, yeah.
And then like, if you're willing to set aside half a day, over the course of the con of reconvening and doing somebody else's.
I mean, really, I feel like it ended up being, maybe like a quarter to a third of our con time was dedicated.
It was invaluable.
It felt, it's so worthwhile. And it's very, I teach at the university creative writing classes, and it's really difficult to do novel writing work in those classes, right? It's just not a good format. So anyway, so I think I cut you off, Liz, when you were talking maybe about what drew you to the work, or maybe you could talk a little about what it's been like working with Ben on the editorial process for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I was drawn in by like just a couple of readings and sort of not even necessarily like having a sense of what the book was, but just that it was like bizarre and delightful, like, you know, most of Ben's short fiction. And also, you know, I've been hearing Ben read as short fiction for a long time and just knew that it was kind of like, you know, I love the voice. We did work together on a short story at Tor.com. And so, you know, knew that it was like, you know, fun to work together. And and I think that you initially started submitting this when I was at Tor, but kind of like when I was like wrapping things up at Tor. And then I looked at it at Erewhon instead, I believe. I think actually I feel like we had a conversation before when I was officially starting Erewhon where I was like, hey, this thing might happen and like maybe I'll look at it there. And it was very slow in like getting it all together, but like eventually we like, you know, figured it out and like wound up actually getting to work together professionally. And it's been super fun. And I think that there was like, you know, periods where it took me, you know, a while to like get through the various stages of this, partially because I think working on it required that kind of like really deep, like sit down and devote everything to this book that is hard to make time for when everything else is going on in the world. So we did a lot of our work we had some macro conversations about it, and then Ben went back and revised. I think I took more of the, I tend to do like pretty intense line edits, and where at the time of recording this is like we finished the line edit, but I still have I think I'm like 3/4 of the way through the pile of like track changes commentary that is like
there may be, I mean, I might be exaggerating, but I feel like the amount of like discourse in the track changes back and forth is like probably roughly equivalent to 1/4 of the words in the book, right? I mean, isn't there a lot? I mean, including the notes on Google Docs and the emails back and forth.
There were 1,000 comments, I think, on the book when I started that. Like, and that was after you cleared out most of it. Like, I probably sent it with like several thousand.
I closed a whole bunch of
world building doc where Ben had like 70 pages worth of world building stuff, and I wrote another like 20 or compiled another 20 pages or so. It's been
this is not I feel like this book is sort of on the extreme edge of a bell curve. Like, you know what I mean? I could have written a simpler book for my first book, but it's sort of like I'm pulling a Tolkien. But that has been the whole story of this book from years now. Is like it has taken so long to write this book, partly because there's this, you know, I've literally spent days while writing this book worrying about a word, like, because so much of it is like, because I'm trying to do this thing of imagining, like honestly imagining the society that's 500,000 years in the future, according to certain sort of rules I've set for myself in the game. And like, you know, it's funny that this book is also an odd footnote is that it has already come out in German. Even before we started this editorial process, there was a German edition before there was an English edition. And in the process of translating that, I basically rewrote the book, you know, and now have rewritten the book again when the change that Liz asked for, which was the hardest for me to make a decision about, was the change of the pronouns. And so it's interesting because in German it's like the pronouns for male and female, like er and sie, are in the book, and in the English version, they are new pronouns because they're not actually, you know, you made a very convincing argument by which I was convinced that we can't read, even if you tell the reader, well, he doesn't represent what it does in our world, it's something else here. You are always going to read that with this valence of, you know, you're always going to interpret that through this filter.
Have you both read the Le Guin essay on that?
The one where she goes back and rewrites.
Well, what happened, Left Hand of Darkness, she wrote an essay that appears in, oh, I can't remember which book it appears in, but she wrote an essay defending her use of he
And
as
then
the
she,
gender
yes,
neutral pronoun. And then like 20 years later, she went
refuting
back
herself.
and changed her mind. And
Yeah,
I just love how she did it because she
yeah,
kind of went through and annotated her original
yeah,
essay
yeah, yeah,
and explained why she was wrong. She thought she was wrong
yeah.
before, and it's
Oh, that's
just
super
brilliant.
interesting.
It's really good.
That's a tour de force not only of thinking about gender and language, but of how you change your mind. Like it's an
Yeah.
incredibly inspiring piece of like, there's no reason Le Guin at the height of her career had to go and pick a bone with herself of 10 years ago,
I know.
except that she's that badass, but
Yeah.
that she put that much time and care into modeling. And I think that's a very like, that's very much the Le Guin of like the practice, like her Taoist anarchist, you know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
Like this is very much, she is modeling like how humans should act by like this very thorough public reconsideration of her own thinking. But anyway,
Yeah, I haven't read that. I haven't read that essay, but I think that I probably went through, a small version of that debate with myself even before asking Ben to make this change. That like I got a book that had he and she pronouns, and I was just kind of like, I feel like we're beyond that now. That we're at a
yeah,
point
yeah.
where like lots of people use pronouns that are not that, and
Mm-hmm.
if this book is going to truly, transform gender in a way or talk about it in a way that is not more to current day society, that like maybe we should consider doing something different. They made that argument to you, and then you went through, I know, a ton of like, contortions about figuring out if that was the right choice and then what the actual right approach was.
Yeah, right. So there was the level. I mean, one thing that I think is funny about this story is that it's so an inversion of the typical cliche where you expect that the writer is this, we sort of, the Hollywood version of this is that the writer is this avant-garde visionary and the editor is trying to like tame them and make them more commercial. And in fact, this was like me being like, I think, and you being like, I don't think you have the courage of your convictions here. And so, I mean, that's wonderful to be pushed in that way. But I think, it was, I had a whole bunch of, it was a very interesting process where I had a whole bunch of concerns, one of which, whether this could be appropriative, whether I was, essentially there are precisely because there are real people who use pronouns that are not he and she, like I was like, do I get to take these and use them in my world? Like, is that not theirs? And that was a really interesting process, both of running it by some people who, like some non-binary people who were more like, yes, no, actually, you should do this. And also, not that that's only them, right? There's a whole bunch of other people who might have other opinions. And also, I think one thing, this is very geeky, that soothed me about it was deciding that, in fact, this isn't allegorical. This could actually be speculative. Like it could actually be these pronouns came into fashion, became the dominant pronouns, fell out of fashion, came back in, were revived, and that this is actually the ancestor of those. It's not. I felt somehow much better about speculating that these pronouns would survive rather than just sort of picking the pronouns up and slapping them down into my future. And I was like, because this is a future history of Earth. Like it could be that these pronouns, end up being dark horse late entrants that edge out the current ones, So anyway, but that was the whole thing.
This is the kind of conversation you had. Yeah.
Very...
So I know the 1,000 comments seems a little bit intimidating. I'm like, do I want to submit a novel to Erewhon now?
No, that's I think that's me more than it is Liz, right? I mean, that's not, I don't know if you can speak to that.
I mean, so I guess I will say that that's the difference that we talked about with the Kelly Link edit and the Your style, like grand edit. Like I do kind of do the beginning conversation of like, let's look at the big blocks, but like I feel like the thing that I like doing the most is the very detailed line edit, and the line edit that is it's fairly typical for a novel length work to come out of it with like and my style is usually, by the time I get to that stage, I will edit the book in track changes and then hand it over to the author and say, all of this is up for debate, reject things, or a lot of questions that are sort of like, this is what I thought, or like, I don't understand what's going on here. Can you find a different solution? And just engaging with the fact that I think that something is not quite right, and either maybe this solution, maybe you'll find another solution. So it's fairly typical to have 4,000, 5,000 like changes in the text that are micro level, comma changes, vocabulary changes, and often, I mean, like several hundred, 500 to 1,000 comments in a book. And some of them are as simple as, hey, I changed this, is this okay? Or I changed this because, or hey, maybe think about the repetition in this, and most of the time, I guess the difference in this process is that with a lot of authors, I will get back maybe like 30 comments that are
unresolved.
I don't know, like here's my thought process here, or like, what do you think of this? And like with Ben, it was probably half or most of the comments.
In my defense,
that was coming back.
In my defense,
Oh, yeah.
I tried to send it. I realized that I was.
There's good reasons for it.
No, but I just want to say I know myself. I know that I'm that it's complicated, and so I did send back the text in a shippable state. I was basically like, I have accepted all the things that I accept. I have rejected all the things I reject. I have made all the changes that I think answer what you're saying. You don't have to look at the comments. You could just take this. I'm okay. I have approved this document. But now here are all the other things. And a lot of times what my comments was I was like, you've made this objection. I don't like your proposed solution. I'm trying to accommodate you. Here are my 3 proposed alternatives, and here's why they're all different. So, it was like I tried to set it up so admittedly, if you're going to engage with every comment, it's a lot of work, but also it's sort of like a multiple choice thing where I was like, I'm giving you 3 options. You can drop one in. You don't have to ask me again. So I tried to make it, as much as I am high maintenance, I tried to make it a manageable. And I think both of us were just very interested in it being right on that level of like, it's a very dense book that's doing a lot of, like, it matters if you use the wrong word in a place, because there's a lot of time. I mean, a lot of the process of revisions was, the thing with the translation was partly noticing that I was talking about from even the prehistory of this, was partly noticing like, oh, they wouldn't use that word. Like they have no, like you can't translate this, like these are the insults that they would use. An insult in a society has to be based on something that's charged or taboo. And there are things that are charged and taboo in our society that are not charged and taboo in their society. If you simply take the insults from our society and use them there, that doesn't make any sense because they wouldn't have those feelings. So you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of like,
yeah, absolutely. Like, every phase of the process was fun and interesting. It's also deep work and hard work, beyond where, every edit like sort of requires a lot of attention, but often it's more at the level of, let's make this sound good. And this was at the level of like world invention.
It's interesting. Like I've worked with a lot of editors over the years, and I wouldn't say it correlates necessarily to like how big the house is or anything like that. It's more the individual editor's approach and temperament. And, I like when I wrote for HarperCollins, the book had gone through, it was my dissertation book. So I'd had my advisor had looked at it and my committee and so on. So it had gone through a lot of revision work, and it got to them in pretty clean shape, right? And they didn't end up essentially making any edits, like almost nothing. They suggested a name change, and we had an argument about whether to italicize words, which I won. And but it took a while, and that was it. They basically kind of took it as is. Whereas I think it was when I was writing for with Ellen Kushner on the Serial Box Tremontaine work, we had a editor on that project who was very much every comma look at, every, like just very detailed, and every line has like annotations going through. And I have to admit, I find that almost exhausting. Like that's a little tough for me. Jed is editing me now, and he asked, like what level of comments I want, and Jed can be a very
Jed loves to talk about semicolons.
Yes, and I told him, please just fix it all in terms of like the punctuation and stuff. I am not emotionally attached to it, and if you think it's better a different way, just do that. You don't need to check it with me. I don't need Microsoft Word comments on it. If you can just ask the things that are real questions. That would
I
be
think that is
ideal.
I think that's a more common way to be, but I am definitely the person who will like have strong opinions about. We had a lot.
Yeah.
There were many. I think of those 1,000 comments, a not insubstantial portion are about commas.
Well, no,
and my saying, I know this is non-standard English. Like I know that this comma is not grammatically correct. Here's why. In the point of view of this character.
Yeah, I mean, I've had editors who disagree with my comma usage, and I'll say mine is maybe a little idiosyncratic, but I guess I always feel like they're more invested in it than I am. If they're bothering to mark it up, like they care, and I'm like, I would put that comma in. I'm fine taking it out, right? So I use more commas than I probably.
I mean, I think I have to say 75% of the comma changes I just accepted. Like it's not like I fought over every comma, but there's just some times where I'm like, no, but I want to break the rules here.
Yeah.
Just the important commas.
Just the important commas.
Just which commas are you willing to die for?
Yeah. And I will stress that, like in a case where if an author cares, I will 99.99% of the time let them win. Like, and that was one of the conversations that we had with Ben about the meta edit, where I was sort of like, look, I don't like to fight for. I'm not going to fight to change your mind most of the time. We extended the conversation a little bit with something with pronouns, where I was kind of like, this is important to engage in. But most of the time, if you care about this comma, I'm going to let you have the comma or the spelling or the hyphen that you care about. I'll present my viewpoint, and then you'll present your viewpoint. You don't even need to present your viewpoint. You can just say, I like this incorrect spelling of this word, and you can have it. It's your book. Your name goes on the cover.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, but I find it an invaluable process. I mean, and I think that's this book. I mean, in some ways, this book has had like a bunch of rounds of like critique. Like that critique when we were talking about it at WisCon, that was years ago. I mean, there was a bunch of rounds with this book, but it's like that's sort of lovely because it's kind of like it grew in a dialogue with all these people. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, and particularly, I mean, and you most of all, Liz, but it's sort of like writing is often very lonely, and like there's a lovely aspect to the editorial process where it's like something that was a solitary monologue, it's kind of like becomes a dialogue at a certain point, and you're kind of like, there's somebody else who cares too, about.
Which is nice.
I love that if it's somebody who cares about every line, and I care about every line. But anyway.
Yes, I think I sort of feel like I wonder how sustainable that is in terms of Liz's time. If she were needing to do that with every author, that would be challenging. But not every book needs that kind of work, right? Like or is inviting that kind of work, right? I would think.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's a struggle that I don't know the answer to. I might have to change, and I actually like sort of anticipate it with sadness, because that's one of the things that I love the most, and I am scared that there will be a point at which I have to go. So right now I am like a publisher who edits about half of the books on the list, and it's true. I already recognize that that's not really sustainable, that it means that I, will wind up working 100 hours a week sometimes, because it's kind of like I have to do if I'm going to do deep editorial work, it can't be, it's the secondary thing on my list. But that's what I got into this for, and I love doing it. And so I feel like it's that balance. I can already say that and sometimes I'll have this, argument with other people in the company where they're like, "Oh, we'll find other people to do that stuff." And from my perspective, I think that if I can't do that, I'm really like disincentivized from, for just like doing the whole thing in general. That like, it's fun to be on the macro level, but I love editing, and
you have to do the part you love.
And so I want to try to find a way. Where where I get to do that process. And though I think that like that question of like, can you do that on every book? I think that like it's partially the kind of editor that I am, where again like I will like often pick books that are pretty sound on the structural side of things, because I feel like I'm less good. I'm not a visionary structural editor. Like sometimes I'll kind of like make good suggestions that wind up being smart, but like I think that the thing that I'm really good at is like basically like taking the book from 98% 8 or 99% to 99.9% and just like,
Right.
dealing with the deep polish work. And
there were some structural edits on the Unravelling too. I mean, it's not all, I mean, there was like, I mean, it did, I think, add 2 or 3 chapters, one of which was then taken out.
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, I know I said I don't do that kind of work. I love it when other people do it from my work, right? Like, so Jed does that kind of like honed, polished line by line stuff, and it makes everything better. I mean, that's terrific, right? So, I
You just
almost
want
feel
it to
like,
be shoemakers elves who come overnight and like leave
well,
the work
no.
invisibly depart,
Well,
having
I guess
fixed all the commas.
from my stuff, I think they're the things I care about and the things I don't care about. The things I care about, I'm happy to have the back and forth conversation. I want to. That's awesome, right? I'm just sort of saying up front, I probably don't care about the commas, although I will defend the Oxford comma to the death. But leaving that aside, in general, I don't care about the commas. So, and I think you develop a relationship with your editor too, where they get to, if you do multiple things with them, they get to know, oh, she really is okay with me just fixing these things, right? Like that's, and I don't, and that probably is a little bit of a process. So it'll be interesting for you, Liz, right? As now every book and every author is a first time in some sense, right? And maybe 5
Although
years
this part
from
of the
now,
process is probably not that different than what you were doing.
right, but
before.
maybe
I mean,
5 years from now, like maybe Ben has another book with you, right? Or do you know what I mean? So and you'll approach that relationship differently, having done one book with him already, and sort of saying, oh, Ben's book is coming up, I better allocate 2 months for the edits on this, right? Because I know what it's like to work with him, etc. Right? So Ben's book is coming up, so we probably can only bring out 11 books next year instead of 12. No, I'm sorry.
Wow, it's a good thing that I'm going to be with Erewhon forever, because you're sure not doing a great job of convincing anyone else to work with me.
It's going to come out and win all the awards, and they'll be, So I am.
Yeah,
confident.
I mean, I always have that larger question, because it's like editorial work deep editorial work is a thing that is very hard to justify on a P&L. It makes no sense. It's a thing that, like, arguably, I don't know if. So some of the bigger changes that we made, of course, people would notice, but like the really picky stuff, you probably 99% of your readers are not going to see that happening, and
consciously won't notice.
Exactly. But I don't even know. Like, I think that there's also kind of you see all sorts of books come out that are just like have not been line edited, have lots of clunky and awkward sentences, or at least like from my perspective.
Those are a little painful, right? I mean, is it that Mark Twain line about the difference between a lightning bug and lightning, right? Like it matters getting the right word. It matters, like, for some writers, you need to help them tone back on the sentimentalism, or like, and and even though it's sort of finicky work, and maybe the reader won't be able to tell what happened, right? Like what you did, the effect on them is so much stronger than they realize, right?
And I do think there's, I think that's true. And I think that one thing is, so I care a lot about the individual words. Something I don't really understand or care about well is like the font, right? But I can tell when something is like the difference between, you know what I mean? Like the difference between somebody having done a beautiful job with the fonts and productions and the kerning and it being like generated from some program. I don't know why it's better, but I can smell that it's better. You know what I mean? I can't consciously articulate it. I might not even, if I were just picking it up and reading it and not asked to look at that, I might not even notice, but it would unconsciously color my impression, I'm sure, of how this feels.
And a lot of that is about like ease of reading experience, and whether it's bad fonts or clunky words, like they throw you out of the book, right? And they make it harder to sink into the fictive dream.
Or even if they don't consciously throw you out of the book, they hold you at a little bit of a distance. Like it's a little bit uphill and you're a little bit.
Yeah. And it gets easier to put the book down and go play a video game instead.
So I think it matters.
Yeah.
But when I talk about 99% of people not noticing, I'm not necessarily talking about readers like you and I, or like people that are also sort of in the writing sphere. I'm talking about the, let's say a mainstream fiction. Many of the most successful books might fall into that camp where we look at them and say, oh God, this is like terrible from a sentence level. Like, how did this become so successful? And there is pretty much no correlation between doing that. Sorry, not no correlation. I would say nobody's charted the correlation between doing that kind of like, deep involved editorial work and something becoming a success.
I will.
Possibly there's some cases in which like that has made the difference between, let's say, a classic that persists and like people will keep reading it and referring to it because it's got the lasting power, because it's got the power from like, the deep craft. But there's a lot of things that like, if you're talking about like, how do we make the most money the fastest?
Sure.
No, I mean, I
don't dispute that. I don't dispute that from an ROI perspective, the line edit is a bad allocation of funds if you're just trying to maximize profit. No argument, right? But it's the kind of thing I'm curious about. Like, it certainly is true that lots of big bestsellers have things that sophisticated readers in some niche that we're in would be like, ugh, I hate this, and yet they sell big. And I think partly that's maybe people to notice. Partly it's they may notice while reading, but that doesn't influence their buying decision. You know what I mean? Like, they're going out to buy the things that all their friends bought, and they buy, and then like maybe in the dark of night at home under a lamp when they're having the reading experience, it is a little attenuated because of that, and it does affect their experience, but not in a way that's going to like affect the bottom line because they're still going to buy it. And maybe also, and this is sort of a recurring theme on the podcast, I feel like, where I and Jed are in the relativist camp and Marianne is more in the absolutist camp, although we've found a little bit of common ground. Like, to some extent, I wonder whether the things we care about are the things we care about, and there is some competing setup, like a thing that's a huge market success that I find language clunky. Maybe that very clunkiness that I dislike is actively appealing to other people for other reasons because it participates of other language traditions and so on. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean,
Possibly.
and I have this experience reading fanfic sometimes where like the most clear example I have of this is that there is a kind of aesthetic that is on like a lot of like AO3 fictions or something, which is like so many words that an editor would make you cut. Right? It's like, this scene, nothing is going to happen either on a literary level or on a, like, of course, sure, James Joyce is the dead, nothing happens, but no, not even like that. Like, like literally just, we're going to spend a long time with like, whatever. And I find that fascinating, that I think that is a positive virtue. People want to luxuriate in this, whereas the sort of canonical, if someone was editing this for a pro fiction book, they'd be like, the story starts on page 39, you can lose all this, yada, yada. And that is like, that actively mitigates against what the fan fiction readers are looking for, but they don't want the story to quote unquote start.
I mean, I mentioned Ellen Kushner earlier, and part of why I wanted to write for Tremontaine was because I loved it so much and I wanted more of that world, right? In the universe. But really, it was fun writing for it, but I really just want more of Ellen. And specifically, I want her protagonists, Alec and Richard, to just like have conversations. I told her this, like, I would pay money. I'd pay like $1 a day to have her send me a scene every morning of just Alec and Richard, like their morning conversation over breakfast, their morning conversation, like whatever. And that's no plot, no story. I just want to hang out with them, right?
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing. So pro fiction is often optimized to leave you like giving you a taste of that and have you shut the book after all the excitement, sort of wishing in your mind that you could only just listen to those, linger at the table and hear those two people talk about nothing with nothing at stake. And like in fan fiction land, someone will write 100,000 words of that. And that's what I mean, where it's like, there are some things that are like, well, in this context, that is actually something you would cut and you wouldn't want, because you want to be like a little taste of that, and then you imagine it, and then we finish the book, and that's it. But like, somebody wants to write 100,000 words of that, and a lot of people want to read it, and that's anyway. So.
And I do want to acknowledge what you say about the aesthetic experience, and it made me think about when I was first started writing. I was writing sex, right? And I wrote erotica and I wrote porn, and people would ask me what the difference was, and I said, well, it's mostly the language you choose to use, and B, porn expects you to have like essentially a sex scene every 1,000 words, right? Like there's this sort of mechanical expectation. But the language thing was really interesting because there were journals like Yellow Silk back then that were aimed at women, and there were words you couldn't use and words that were expected, right? And they were softer words, right? We're going to try and keep this podcast PG-13 at least. So I'm not going to go through all the words. Maybe we'll do an X-rated one at some point. But whereas when I was writing for Puritan, which was a hardcore porn magazine, they wanted the hard words. They wanted the four-letter Anglo-Saxon. Yeah, right. So, and that was what their readers wanted and expected out of that reading experience, right? So there's something to like, what kind of reading experience are you trying to create is an interesting question. I don't know. That said, I couldn't get through Twilight. I mean, I picked it up thinking like, okay, people love this. It must have something valuable. And for me, the prose was so clunky. I couldn't get through the first chapter. I don't know. So, but maybe that's a failure on my part.
I can't speak to Twilight because I've never attempted it.
You should try it. We should just no. You don't have
to.
Maybe
so. We have a Twilight episode.
Yeah.
Do you all know A Journey to the End of Taste?
Mm-mm.
This is one of my, like, everybody involved in culture should read this experience. It's a book from the 33 1/3 series of like small books on particular albums. And this is about Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On signal.
I have. Maybe I have heard this. I have heard.
Yeah, so there's a shorter version and then there's a larger like whole book of essays. But the short version is this perfect short book length essay basically about the distinction between popular culture and like, sort of like rarefied aesthetic culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you said it's called Journey to the End of Taste. Is that the title?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah,
I've read the book, and it's very interesting. I mean, it's basically this Canadian sophisticate hipster music reviewer guy who grew up hating Celine Dion. She was the opposite of everything he stood for. She was, sentimental pablum with no just like filler, and then he, as an old, years later, goes back and interrogates his own. What is going, from a sort of Baudrillardian point of view, what is going on with his, what does it tell us about culture that he can't stand this thing that other people love? And he's sort of like second guessing himself throughout the whole book. It's quite, it's an interesting book.
It's wonderful.
I have that book because David Moles gave it to my daughter. That's why I read it at some point. He's David Moles, by the way, great shout out to David Moles as a giver of presents to kids. I'm currently reading. He gives them to my kids, and then I read them before the kids do because I get around to them faster. I snap them up. I'm reading Encounters with the Archdruid, which he sent to Noah. Anyway, which is a book from the 70s, a report from the 70s about this guy who was the founder of this, or director of the Sierra Club, some major environmental activist, and all of his in the first part that I just read, they go on a hike, him and this industry mining guy who wants to mine the hell out of everything, and the guy who wants to protect everything, and this author and two graduate students hike into the Cascades, and it's like a sort of a wonderfully detailed exposition of everything that happens. Anyway,
so that actually leads in pretty well, because I would say that I have two questions left for Liz as we're heading towards a wrap up, and I don't know if Ben has any lingering questions.
Well, I think we might want to at least briefly talk about games, since that's another thing we all have.
I'm going to get my writing questions in first, and then we might be able to hit games. So I feel like we're going to keep her forever. But so I would say David Moles is a good editor, a good workshop critiquer, gives good feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have this culture in science fiction of putting these workshops together, giving each other community feedback. One of the questions that I get a lot from my students is, should I be hiring an editor to edit my work before I send it in to publishers? And so that's very foreign to me in terms of my writing, editing, cultural traditions, but I gather it's becoming more and more of a thing. And certainly there have been days when, now that I'm out of the grad school environment and so on, where I've been like, God, I really wish I had an editor to sit down and help me work through this earlier stage of the book before I'm sending it out to places like Erewhon, right? So Liz, if you could talk a little about do you think that's okay? Do you expect it? I feel like there was sort of a sense in the earlier days, editors had a lot of time for developmental work, and so you didn't need to do that. And with the sort of the big media conglomerates taking over the publishing houses and the collapse of distribution channels and all of that, that there's sort of a sense that editors don't get to do that as much as they did in like the 70s or whatever, right? So
yeah, I am pretty wary of that for a few reasons, and I would say that like my answer is you never should have to do that. You don't have to do that. And like one of the things that places that my wariness comes from is sort of the growing up in the predators and editors mold of, and that's PREDITORS, which is like a board where they talked about kind of like basically, I don't know if this is as alive right now, but for a while there were a lot of scam agents and a lot of like scam publishers where they would basically attempt to take advantage of authors. And one of the big ways that they take advantages of authors is they would say, you'd this is where the phrase like money should flow towards the author kind of came from, where you would put your book up for publication, and not only would they not pay you, but then suddenly you would be forced to employ a bunch of like different services, and they would say, oh well, you have to get it edited by somebody, and we can recommend this person who might be taking kickbacks from the house that like or basically like, and they would never actually care like about the results of the edit. They would just care that like the author was paying for the edit. And so as a result, it's like, I think that nobody should ever have to do a thing that is like causing them to spend money out of their own pocket in the pursuit of finishing their book. And I think the other argument for like not necessarily, well, I guess two other arguments for not necessarily like recommending going the editorial path beforehand is, first of all, is that you've eventually got to find a way to get your books edited without paying for it. That you don't want to wind up in like producing a thing that like you can't live up to in your career. Maybe you could go and get somebody to professionally edit your first book, but then do you like work with this person forever, or do you figure that you maybe there's a model wherein you could learn from an editor and say, hey, I'm going to learn therefore how to edit my own books in the future. But I think that a lot of people sort of like look at that as the end of the road. Right. Whereas I think that the other model of like either learning to revise your work yourself or learning to work with a crit group or like beta readers or places in which you can kind of develop the skills to self-edit is far more valuable than paying somebody else to do that work for you, because it will pay dividends over your entire career. And
I have to say, I think that's a great response. I wonder a little bit whether, occasionally I'll meet people who are seniors and they are writing one book, they're writing a memoir or something, and they are not expecting to have a long career of writing many books. And I kind of feel like that may be a different case where they really want someone to come in and help them get it into good shape. And this is like the book for them, right? So as opposed to my students who are often, 20-somethings who are looking at a long road, hopefully, right? So
right, yeah. And I think that even people that like that are looking at a long career wind up saying like, oh, is this the secret to open the door? And once the door is open, then I will like be set forever. But that's not how it works.
Right.
You sell one book, it is one step in a long career, and you need to keep selling books and keep producing sort of good proposals and good work. So like, I think that like, ultimately that I don't think that it's sustainable necessarily to kind of to get somebody else to do that work for you.
I wonder whether if you work with an editor and you get a book with them to a place where you're really happy with it, if that then makes you more reluctant to make changes with your actual editor, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like you might get so wedded to that version that you then have no flex going forward. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, but I think the other side of that is like, yes, maybe that, but I think that the bigger peril there is that like the editorial process is designed to optimize the book for the market that it's going into. And if you find an editor, even if they're a good editor, like they're making changes to make the book that they want. And you want to either make the book that you want or make the book that like, is optimized for the market. So even if you're writing a relatively commercial book, like there's conventions of that are different for if something is like published towards paranormal romance versus if it's published towards YA versus if it's published towards core science fiction and fantasy. And I think there's been cases where, like, early in my career, I was like submitted something that I wasn't even allowed to buy at Tor, and the person that wound up buying it, it went on to become basically like a paranormal romance bestseller. And I didn't read the finished product that like came out as a paranormal romance, but I'm absolutely certain that the edits that we would have done on those book would have been almost diametrically opposed. Where editing for a romance audience might be like, okay, we're gonna like bring these aspects to the forefront and not focus as much on the deep world building.
Can you make the world building more hand wavy?
Yeah.
I care about the magic and the world building, and those are the things that I would have like worked on honing. And so in some ways, like if you were editing towards no particular audience, like that could wind up taking you further away from what the vision is that would actually cause it to sell somewhere.
And then my related question, I think, is for people listening to this who are like, I'm listening to this podcast because I think Erewhon Books is fabulous and I desperately want to sell a book to them, right? What advice would you give to people who come to you and say that, basically, right? Like, I'd love to have you publish my stuff. What would you say?
Yeah, I think step one is hopefully like be familiar with the kind of thing that we're doing. That's the test that the most people fail. That we just opened up for submissions again, and saying this again in the past. And we're gonna try to have open submissions basically twice a year. And we get a lot of. I'm pleased that we do get a decent number of submissions that seem to understand what we're about. But we also get a decent number of submissions that are like, this is a 12 book, like very standard medieval epic fantasy series. And like, so the first thing is like, look, that we're not your house. Like, maybe we will possibly wind up publishing some like very good and weird epic fantasy down the road, but that's not our prime mandate. And so understand that we are looking for things that are unique visions. So perennially editors have to answer questions about like what things do you see being trendy, and like the answer is always I don't care.
Right.
Like maybe eventually when I'm talking about the marketing aspects of things, I've got to talk about why this is going to be appealing to current audiences, but like I want to see your unique vision. So the first step is probably not worrying so much about like what I want, and like writing the book that only you can produce, and like writing the best version of that book, like that I will care about the quality of the prose, that of ultimately, like, it doesn't mean that your book has to be 100% perfect from a grammatical perspective, but it does mean that I'm focusing way more on like that you have prose that I enjoy reading than that you have a romance that resolves itself in the strict like beats where the beats are supposed to be, or even that like that you've got the correct ratio of action sequences to like quest sequences.
Right. Ben, do you have any other editing related questions for Liz? And if not, I think we can do a little coda on gaming.
Sure. I feel like, that the stuff about the hiring an editor is very much like, that's also, we all come out of that same milieu of like writing flows toward the author, and I feel like that is certainly there is a healthy suspicion of all these people who fall prey to scams. But I have seen a shift in the last years toward there being specific things where it's sort of less about, I want to say two things. One is another downside of that, following on what Liz said, is that not only are you not, maybe not learning to do it yourself and trying to get someone else to do it, and maybe you shouldn't be paying somebody to do this, but also potentially you are excluding yourself from the other option, which is developing a community of peer relationships, which is sort of the ideal that I keep holding up, right? That in a way you want to be getting together and editing each other's stuff, because that is a much richer vein. However, as a sidelight to that, I will say that there are cases, I feel like recently, where the conversation is headed in the direction of, if you are talking about inside of a community, that like sometimes, and the obvious example is sensitivity reads, that sometimes like an ethic is emerging where it's like, well, maybe you should pay people, even if they're your friends, for asking certain kinds of questions, and them doing a certain kinds of labor because that's fair and that's a particular expertise that they can provide that that you can't just bone up on necessarily, particularly if in the case of sensitivity reads, it's like I am writing about this thing that I am not, this identity that I don't possess, and I need to get, like, it is a matter of responsibility, an ethical responsibility, to have somebody who this is their lived experience weigh in on this. And also, I don't, there's no like one way to make that fair would be I'm going to pay for this as a service, as opposed to, them doing it as a favor, which in that particular context might be kind of fraught because they're doing,
right,
you're not
right. For general editing, you can do sort of like trade. I'll critique your story, you critique mine. But sensitivity reading, you may not.
Sometimes you can do trade for sensitivity.
That's the thing. Like sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. Right? Like
and sometimes, and I'm not. I don't think it should be banned to have it be a barter system, because I think it's perfectly reasonable to be like, can you do a sensitivity read? I'm happy to do a crit, and if that's something that they want to do. But I also think that that's a case where I feel like the conversation has been like, maybe sometimes we should be paying each other.
That's a totally fair point, and I absolutely believe in like paying people for their labor in that regard, especially with difficult labor. I guess though, that points to like another thing that I wanted to talk to, which is the question of that I do think that it's fair to have sort of authorial anxiety about you don't know what's going to happen to your book, like once you hand it into the publisher, that it could go anywhere from you get an incredibly intense like 7-round edit, and then you get a copy edit, and then you get a proofread, and you're offered to like several sensitivity readers along the way, to absolutely nothing, like where no edits happen to your book, or hopefully maybe like it just goes straight to a copy editor or somebody like fixes the grammar and so on. And so I can understand where it's hard to adjust your expectations there. And that's a case where I've like encouraged people kind of talking about that and like at least sort of figuring out, okay, so like what support am I going to get? But also like that make sure, you can put a book out on submission, but like, probably you want to feel okay with by the time you get to the point of like putting it into press, that it's a thing that you're not going to be embarrassed by, and like make that a part of the discourse, that if you feel like, oh gosh, I need like you start feeling like this needs a line edit and maybe it's not going to get it, maybe I need to engage in that to keep myself from being embarrassed, like at least like talk to the house about that, or like figure out a way to make that happen if it's not a thing that is like, apparently happening. And I think that that's true of sensitivity reads as well, that like, I kind of feel like, again, in the vein of that the author shouldn't have to pay for this, like, hopefully if it's a case where there's aspects that are clearly outside of both the editorial and authorial experience, that somebody should be paying a sensitivity reader to do that read. But if I'm sure that it's difficult from an authorial perspective to figure out, oh, is my publisher going to volunteer to do that? Like, or like, can I ask them to do that? And maybe it's safest or healthiest to kind of do something like that to begin with. And I think in most cases, you'll sort of see people covering both of those bases, that somebody, that a lot of authors, especially that care about this kind of thing, will have like gotten either a beta read or a paid sensitivity read before the book is handed over to the publisher. But then especially if it's a case where it's important, then the publisher is also going to like want to do a sensitivity read.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like that's even useful at a very early stage. I mean, I'm thinking of, I have friends who have written books that they then decided were problematic and had to walk away from the book. And that's heartbreaking. And it's one of those things like, maybe it would have been worth, paying a consulting fee to have an hour-long conversation with somebody about, this is what I'm planning to do. What do you think? Am I going to run into trouble? What are some, so there's kind of like I'd be interested to see if things develop that way. I was thinking about like, where would I actually advise someone that sure, paying an editor is a reasonable thing to do. And I think it's been a couple of specific cases. One is someone for whom English was their second language, and they were really not confident in their, being able to present their ideas well in English, right? And so they wanted someone fluent who could go through and smooth out the language. So that I thought was like, like they didn't want to submit it until that happened, right? And so, and similarly, these I keep talking about these seniors, but I meet a lot of them where they want to write a memoir and they have, they haven't taken writing classes, they don't have any experiences, they have a life story that they want to tell, right? And they are not trying to like break into a larger marketplace. They mostly want the book to exist, maybe for their family. And I think in that case where you're essentially indie publishing and you're not trying to set up a career, paying an editor to help you get this to be something you're proud of and happy to have in the world seems fine to me. And part of this is like, we've been trying to figure out at the SLF whether we would want to vet and have lists of like non-scam people doing this. And so I've been trying to think about like, am I tacitly giving permission to a bad practice, or is it okay in this case, right? Does that make sense?
I mean, I also feel like even just the case of, I mean, you're talking about self-publishing and you don't want it to be a career, but I think even if you are in fact self-publishing, that's a little bit of a different situation where, like we were saying about small business in general, you should do what you're good at. And if you're good, you know what I mean? Like if you're sort of like, I have amazing visions and world building and I really like doing cover design and publishing, but I know I'm not going to be able to do my own line editing. Right. And you're self-publishing, you're the publisher, you're running a business, that's perfectly reasonable to delegate that part of it, right? I mean, that's
sure.
That's a different thing that's
often Oh, sorry. I was going to say also often you're just too close to your own work to like do all of that work for yourself. So if you are on the self-publishing side of things, like if there's not going to be somebody else who's going to catch the things that you are not able to see because you've seen the text too much, then like maybe you do need to hire somebody else to be that second reader.
Okay. So maybe we will put that list together at some point. I have felt the urge myself to like, a writer friend of mine, Minal Hadratwala, does writing coaching as a side business. And I love her writing. I think she's super smart. And I have periodically thought maybe I should like book an hour of writing coaching time just to like work through some of these issues, right? And I think that can also be reasonable, but there have been a lot of scam people in the past. And that's partly why I'm thinking it would be nice to have a directory of reputable people that were vetted and like they're qualified, they're charging fair rates, they're giving good value for money, etc. So,
and maybe a little guide on when to use this and what the pitfalls are of employing somebody at all. Like we said, like if you're starting out and and you're doing this instead of developing a community of people who will give each other feedback and you're part of that discourse, don't do that, but on the other hand, in these other cases.
Right. And people often don't know that like they can go to conventions and there'll be workshops and, so making people aware of the
other options.
Yeah, the constellation
local writing groups
that's available to them. All right. So gaming, you both do a lot of gaming. So finishing this up, I don't have specific questions. Are there things that you would want to talk about in terms of games you've done together, or
it's really a commonality of all three of us, Marianne. You both of you play tested early drafts of my role-playing game, Dream Apart, for one thing, memorably.
So that's an RPG. And Liz, am I right that you do LARPing too? Am I remembering that right?
I do. Yes, I did LARPing in the world in which we could do LARPing. But yeah, I did a lot of and I think I guess I always clarify that I often will do sort of like Nordic LARP and American freeform. So not necessarily the sort of like big fantasy, like, have an encounter with goblins in the woods, but like have kind of like deep emotional experiences with people that are, playing other humans going through a life crisis, the things of that sort.
That's an intense genre, the Nordic LARPs and everything. Like I remember encountering, like, having played plenty of like D&D and RuneQuest and then even things like Apocalypse World, which is still in that, but then like encountering Nordic LARPs, which are like, this is a LARP about three friends, one of whom has cancer, and they meet over the course of this LARP, they meet three times, one of which is the wake, in which the third one is, observing as a ghost. And you're like, really?
I've never LARPed, so this is a completely new world to me.
It's not necessarily what people think of when you think of LARP. The Nordic LARP is am I misrepresenting? I mean, that's a That's a classic, right?
No, that is absolutely accurate. I've basically played that game.
I think it's Robin's Friends, actually.
Yeah,
I think I'm thinking of a
it is a
specific
super
game.
intense experience. It's like, and I mean, I think it's a, I don't know, it is a weird thing where I actually like tried a few different styles of LARP that I completely bounced off of before wandering into this like, small but like, vibrant sub community. And I will say that like I guess like sort of weird indie tabletop games do have a lot of intersection with the weird indie LARP type games, but I feel like it's a, I don't know, it's like an experience synthesis kind of thing where just being able to have or engage in a kind of encounter that you might not be able to have otherwise, or like explore scenarios or emotions or feelings that you can't necessarily do in real life, but do it in like a deeply involved sort of way. And I mean, I think that like coming from a tabletop experience, I guess the difference is the 360 degree of it, that often rather than let's say saying my character does this, it's like you are your character, you speak as your character and move as your character. And and also I think that the range of subject matter maybe now there's like clearly lots going on in the tabletop space, but a lot of people that are tabletop players, I would say probably the vast majority, have only done kind of like fantasy, epic fantasy type like quest sort of stories in a D&D like or Pathfinder like setting. And I always think of it as the difference between, let's say, like the MCU and all of the rest of film.
Right.
All of the rest of film does exist in gaming.
Yeah.
It's just that like it's kind of, like a different group of people maybe is like playing it and engaging it and developing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that blur between tabletop and LARP, and there are lots of, I mean, there's like, there's dialect. There's a bunch of tabletop games that are also like in this game we're going to invent a language. Like that's all that's there are no dragons. We're going to invent a language, but and one thing I think is interesting structurally about even the indie tabletop games and the LARPs that are very close in the sense of like the subject matter being very broad and the ambition to like pay attention to lots of different aspects of human behavior and also the interest in sort of meaty emotional material and so on. But one thing I think is interesting is that a lot of this Nordic LARP tradition, there's a very plot is often very scripted. Like a lot of the which is sort of the opposite of the sort of PBTA or like even like Dream Apart, Dream Escape. Like so a lot of the indie tabletop games are like, we have no idea what's going to happen in this game. Like we're creating all this deep character richness. We're throwing you at each other. There's some mechanics that like highlight certain aspects of human experience, and like who knows. And then there's a lot of the Nordic style LARPs, at least, which are a crossover of many the same people actually, but for structural reasons are much more like, so in the first scene you are meeting your computer partner, the AI who's been created to be your lover / partner / child, and then in the second scene you will be, and then in the third scene after that, you know what I mean? Like it's very much like the plot is definitely determined, and now you're going to inhabit these scenes. I don't know if that's universal, but I noticed that a lot.
Yeah, so I think I want to draw the distinction because I think that there's a wide variance of, let's say, what sort of like plot is generated, and that is dependent on some of that is like that games from different traditions will have sort of different amounts of this pre-scripted. Some of it comes from the fact that rather than like a case, like a D&D or an Apocalypse World, which are like system games, almost all these games are systemless, where people design the architecture of the game as part of the process of designing the game. And so sometimes that means that, you're sort of deciding what happens in the scene in advance as a way of a facilitator moving the action along, or synthesizing the storytelling experience that you want, or is it that you want the players to have over the course of the game. But there's probably a distinction there between something that is like an actual like a pre-written plot, and there are games like that where it's kind of like you're going to go through these different beats, and the point of this scene is to get to the get to the point where you're like cows are brought to the slaughterhouse, which is a game way go away that I actually played, which is about Kobe beef cows, and it's a railroad experience where your cows go and have a Pixar-like adventure and then they're brought to slaughter. And that is the plot of the game. But I think that that's different than like you alluded to, I think, Here Is My Power Button, which is, I wouldn't say that the plot is scripted. The encounters are scripted, you know, to some extent, but the important thing about that game is not what happens in the plot. The important thing is in the character interaction, where you might know, okay, like at the end of this, there's going to be, let's say, an event, and that event exists in everybody's play style. But that the thing that is vastly more important is the relationship that develops, and so the plot is not important. Maybe it's supplied for you, but that the field that you're playing on is actually the character interaction.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's a distinction between like the micro plot and the macro plot. So I mean, what I mean, part of the thing is that, of course, partly I think it has to do with the constraints of just like you are going to be like, we have to manage like there's a bunch of people in the room. They're not going to break character and suddenly just then start meta discussing what's happening. You know, you all have to be doing. There's actually there's 20 people here, not just 4, and you're going to have to all do the same thing at the same time. So there's some structural constraints that make this more likely, that make it less likely. Whereas if you were playing, you know, Apocalypse World or Dream Askew, you could just be like, and then somebody has a Zeppelin and now we're on the moon. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just a new setting, but that's harder to do in this context. So there's less attention to that sort of macro plot of like, wait, we killed the warlord, but this guy's the new warlord, and more attention to like, well, we definitely know at the end of this scene, this person's going to stand up and walk out, and that's the last time these two people will see each other. That's decided. But of course, everything is at stake in what are the last words they say to each other. So that kind of micro plot of like, this could go any direction, but not in the sense of like you do leave in 5 minutes and I never see you again. That we know. But in that 5 minutes, it could go any direction in the sense that the emotional tenor could be vastly different. So, you know, so there's a lot of, I just think that's an interesting thematic change that comes out of, I think, partly out of those structural constraints that makes those feel very different, even though they're have sometimes there's similar ambitions to some of those games, you know.
Right, now I want to try this. I've never LARPed, so I'm like, this sounds intriguing. So
I cried so much playing.
Really?
What's the name about This Is My Power Button?
Here Is My Power Button, yeah.
Here Is My Power Button.
Which is basically her. It's her, the movie, the LARP, effectively, but it's just like it is structurally really well done.
Yeah.
And I mean, I advocate kind of like a lot of things like this as sort of a writing and creativity tool. You know, and for me, it sort of existed, and I stumbled into both like indie tabletop and LARP at a point at which I was kind of, and I still have these like as part of my own like self-doubt, is like I'm not, you know, feel like I'm not an inherently creative person. I was like editing other people's work, but I couldn't create anything by myself. And then suddenly you're in one of these games where you have to spontaneously create plot and create characters, like, you know, in a room together, and just trying this out and being like, oh, actually, like I have a lot of ideas, and like people seem to enjoy exploring these ideas with me. It was very gratifying from a perspective of just being able to do a creative endeavor with the guidelines to help me do it, but also feeling like a lot of that was generated from within myself.
All right. That was our coda on games.
That was our coda on games, and maybe we'll have Liz back at some point. We talked about doing a gaming panel discussion at some point with maybe Avery Alder, who we've had on before, and some other people. So I could imagine a focused game discussion that would be fascinating. So thank you so much, Liz. I'm serious about the editing classes. I mean, honestly, I kind of think Masterclass should call you up and be like, Liz Gorinsky, will you teach for Masterclass? But
I want to see the ad, the like interstitial YouTube ad.
I know, right? Liz. It's going to be awesome, right? So, but yeah, I don't know. Last thoughts? Anything else you want to say before we let you go? We should all run out and pre-order Ben's book. Is it available for pre-order yet?
It is.
It is. Yes, so the Unravelling,
or possibly even purchase,
right?
And all the rest of the
all the rest. I know, until a subscription model is set up.
Particular plug for Scapegracers, which I'm loving.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to say, like, be grateful if you read like any Erewhon book, but also, at this point I'm like all indie, all in on indies. So support your indie publishers, support your indie booksellers. Like, that's how we get a vibrant speculative fiction universe. A lot of good stuff comes out from the big houses, but also that there's like a lot going on that is, not necessarily, is more sustainable from within the sort of smaller and more bespoke models.
Yeah.
And on that note, maybe go to IndieBound and
that's right, for
to
your
order
purchasing.
a copy of
Yes.
Unravelling if you
That's right.
would like.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the SLF used to do this Fountain Award back in the early days where we it was modeled on the Pushcart Prize, and it was for short fiction, and we would ask editors to submit their favorites of what they'd published in the last year, and then we had a jury that would read them all and give $1,000 prize. And we've been talking about bringing that back. I would love to see us also do something similar for small press, genre small press, right? And so we'd need to like set up some criteria as what counts as small press, and et cetera, so on, right? So it's not like competing with, we wouldn't be looking at books from Tor for this, right? So, but I think it could be pretty interesting. So, all right. Thanks again.
I think that's 3 spin-off projects that Marianne has founded during the course of this podcast episode.
We took some notes.
Only 3. How are we doing? What's the average?
She's being very restrained. She's trying to keep it under control.
Well, the last time we met, Ben scolded me for not being focused on my writing projects.
Scolded? That is not an accurate representation. That is totally I am you know very well that I am a huge fan of Marianne the impresario as well as Marianne the writer. It's just admiration
gentle
for
reminder.
Your bountiful energy.
Yes.
I am gently mocking you.
Yes.
And it's a backhanded compliment or back. I am gently mocking you, and the actual subtext is that you're awesome.
Thanks. Good. I appreciate it. It is also true that if I spend all of my time in service, I will never write any books. So it's a challenging trade-off. And I say this as I am like in the midst of running for office, and in theory I'm on a writing retreat, but I keep thinking like, I still haven't ordered my yard signs. I really have to do that because the election's on April 6th, and I don't really believe in yard signs, but people get cranky if you don't put any of them up. So anyway, I'm going to finish the novel though, I swear. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for coming, Liz.
Thanks for coming,
It was great to see you.
All right. Having me.
Okay.